بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذرياته ومن اهتدى بهديه ليوم الدين. تركنا على المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك. ثم أما بعد. All praises due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord and Sustainer of the worlds. We beseech Him and implore Him to offer His manifest blessings and salutations upon His last and final Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon His wives, His kin, His companions, and all those who follow Him, and His guidance till the last day. He has left for us a clear, pristine path. Its day is its night. No one will diverge from it except find destruction. So we are into, inshallah, our third session of the abridgment of Imam Al-Bukhari radiallahu anhu, as abridged by Imam Abdullah ibn Abi Jamrah rahimahullah. And last week we had begun to read the first hadith, Hadith Bad al-Wahi, or the beginning of revelation, and in it we had discussed how the Prophet ﷺ, as narrated by Aisha, his wife radiallahu anha, first received initial indications of revelation before the meeting in Ghar Hira with Jibreel alayhi salam, when he used to see true dreams for a period of 6 months prior to the liqa, or meeting with Jibreel alayhi salam. And as it goes in most of the narrations, this happened during Ramadan, and he received his initial dreams during Rabi' al-Awwal, which was right at the beginning of his 40th year, and then 6 months later he met Jibreel in Ghar Hira. And we also discussed that isolation was made beloved to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that he would leave for a period of time, usually numbering 30 days and nights, before he would come back and take provision and see that his family's rights were being served, before returning back to Ghar Hira, or the cave of Hira in Jabal al-Nur, the mountain of light. And then when he finally had the meeting with Jibreel alayhi salam, and he was shaken violently by the angel 3 times and asked to recite Iqra, and he would say on each time, Ma ana biqari, until the first verses of the Quran were revealed in Surah Al-Araq, Iqra. And then after that he returned to his wife Khadija radiallahu anha and explained to her what had happened, and even displayed some dismay at what had happened by saying, Inni khashitu, aw wallahi qad khashitu ala nafsi, that I had some fear about what this happening was. And then she assuaged his fears by telling him that you are the person who joins the family ties, and one who helps the poor and the sick, and so forth. So none of this type of makruh, or this type of detestable thing, should happen to you. And then she even offered to take him to her cousin, her paternal cousin from her father's side, Waraqa ibn Nawfal, to ask him about the matter as well. And Waraqa was someone, as the hadith says, قَدْ تَنَصَّرَ فِي الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ, he became a Christian during the Jahili time. And most of the ulama say that he was following a type of Christianity that was not munharif, that was not something that was affected later on by later Christians. In other words, he was not one who believed in the divinity of Jesus, or that he was the son of God, or anything of this sort. And then he said, Waraq ibn Nawfal, that I wish that I would be young when your people would exile you. And the Prophet displayed some bewilderment, thinking, how would his people exile him, and he knows that he is an Amin, and that people have much trust in him, and that he is the one that they chose to place the Hajar al-Aswad, the sacred rock, in the Kaaba after it was destroyed and rebuilt by Quraysh. And then Waraqa said to him, no one has come with what you have come with, except that they have made enemies. In other words, no one has come with something that defies the status quo, that goes against the normal way of things, and what people are used to, except that it will make an enemy. They will be enemies of yourself. So, and then it was narrated at the end of the hadith that it was not longer, or not later after that, Waraqa passed away. And that's where we stopped last week. Now, the second part of the hadith is also from the same hadith, but the Rawi mentions where he says, قال Ibn Shihab, and Ibn Shihab is the Rawi from one person removed from Aisha radiallahu anha, or two persons removed from Aisha radiallahu anha. So then he gives the same isnad but with a different initial Rawi or narrator, where he says قال ابن شهاب وأخبرني أبو سلمة ابن عبد الرحمن أن جابر ابن عبد الله الأنصاري قال وهو يحدث عن فترة الوحي قال في حديثه بين أنا أمشي إذ سمعت صوتا من السماء فرفعت بصري فإذا الملك الذي جاءني بحراء جالس على كرسي بين السماء والأرض فرعبت منه فرجعت فقلت زملوني زملوني فأنزل الله تعالى عز وجل يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر والرجز فاهجر المدثر فحمي الوحي وتتابع. So this end of the hadith, as we mentioned last week, there was a period called Frathat al-Wahi, or a time in between the initial revelation and the next revelation, and Fatra just means period in between. And the ulama differ about how long that was, but some of them said up to 3 years was the period of time between these two revelations. And so during this period of time, that Fatrat al-Wahi, there was some da'wah going out, so to speak, but it was only amongst the people of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his household. So they included Khadija radiallahu anha, and Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, and Zayd ibn Haritha, who was also a member of the household serving the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time. And it's a question of debate if Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu actually became Muslim during this time, or sometime after, or whether he was before Ali or Ali was first. Again, but they were amongst the first 4 or 5, namely Khadija radiallahu anha, Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, and Zayd ibn Haritha were the first Muslims. So the translation of the hadith, the last part of the hadith, that Ibn Shihab said, and I was informed by Salama ibn Abdul Rahman that Jabir ibn Abdullah the Ansari said, and he was speaking about the period of the stoppage in Wahi, or Fatrat al-Wahi, and he mentioned in the hadith about the Prophet ﷺ said that while I was walking, I looked and I heard a sound or a voice from the sky. So I looked up at the sky and I saw the angel that had come to me in Hira, sitting on a throne between the sky and the earth. So I became frightened of him, and so then I returned back to Khadija and I said to her, Zammiluni, Zammiluni, which means, or Dathuruni, Dathuruni, to cover me up, to assuage my fear and to allay my fears at what I've just seen. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verses, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, O the one who has been wrapped up, Qum fa'anzir, stand and forewarn, وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, and your Lord you should aggrandize, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, and to keep your clothes pure and clean, وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ, and corruption and rujz should be abandoned or abandon it. فَحَمِيَ الْوَحْيُ وَتَتَابَعْ, and then after that the wahi, hamiya, yani it became more regular and followed after this. So there was no more period of long periods of silence or stoppage between one revelation and the next. And so for the next 20 years, if we assume that the Fatrat al-Wahi was 3 years, so 10 years in Mecca, and then 10 years in Medina, ala sahib Abdul Salam, making 20 years, which was the period of revelation after the initial Fatrat al-Wahi, or the stoppage or the period in between the revelation that happened initially. And so we see here that in this particular part of the hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ now is seeing Jibreel alayhi salam in his true form, and not in his form as a man. And as we know, angels have the ability to take on different forms, and they can have their true form, or they can take the form of a person, a living being, and assume their form. And it's said that Jibreel alayhi salam assumed the form of one of the Sahaba, or looked like one of the Sahaba, namely his name was Dihya al-Kalbi, who was said to be one of the more handsome of the Sahaba, and Jibreel alayhi salam took that form when he visited the Prophet ﷺ as a man. And we know from other hadith that even people besides prophets and messengers can see the angels when they assume this form of a man. Probably the most famous example of this is the hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab dealing with Iman and Islam and Ihsan, when Jibreel came in the form of a man, and he was wearing very white clothes and very jet black hair, and he asked the Prophet ﷺ about Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, and as the hadith goes, he answered those questions. And the Sahaba who were with him at the time, of course, were able to see him, and even the Prophet ﷺ asked Umar after he had left, do you know who that was? And he said, Allah wa Rasuluhu A'lam. And then he said, this is Jibreel, he came to teach you the matter of your deen. So it's possible for one to see an angel in their, say, human form. So, when he saw him in his true form, however, filling up the sky, and then the Prophet ﷺ said, فَرُعِبْتُ مِنْهُ, so I became frightened of this. We see here also the theme of tadrij or tadarruj that we spoke about last week. Now, if the Prophet ﷺ at this later point, having realized from earlier on that this indeed was an angel, so it appears from the nas, from the text of the hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was walking and he saw Jibreel alayhi salam in the sky, he knew that he was an angel. But nevertheless, the sheer sight of a being filling up the sky, between the sky and the earth, obviously was an awesome type of sight to see. But we see initially that Jibreel came in the form of a man. Had he come in this particular form, his true form, in Ghar Hira, then that might have been too much for any human to bear, even the Prophet ﷺ. So there's a type of gradation or tadarruj that we see that went from the isolation, Ghar Hira, the true dreams, the initial meeting with Jibreel alayhi salam, and then the Fatrat al-Wahi, the period of stoppage between Wahi, is also a type of tarbiyah. And as we mentioned last week, the Prophet ﷺ said about himself, أَدَّبَنِي رَبِّي فَأَحْسَنَ تَأْدِيبِي, that my Lord has raised me or nurtured me, has given me adab, so he has given me the best type of adab. And so this is what we see happening with the Prophet ﷺ. If we compare this with later on, let's say the Prophet ﷺ in Al-Medina, where he probably rarely had a moment alone of isolation. He was always amongst us, either the Sahaba or his wives, or people asking questions, or people visiting him, or discussing affairs with his closest companions like Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhum. So he rarely had a moment to himself. And even when he would pray at night, as Aisha narrates radiallahu anha, he would pray and she would be lying down in front of him, and then when he would go in sujood, she would move her legs so that he can make sujood. So he went from sort of a physical isolation, but as he was being raised, as the tadarruj was happening, raising in degree and in rank, he was able to also do this amongst the multitudes. So the lesson in there for us is that even in the beginning of our journey, a physical solitude might be apt for some of us, but eventually we know, as we mentioned last week, that المخالطة مع توفية الأحكام خير من العزلة, that to be amongst people, and observing the Sharia and observing people's rights and not harming anyone is a better status, is a better degree than to be completely isolated from people or to stay away from people for fear out of being affected by them or they're being affected by you in a negative way. So when he saw him in the sky and then he returned back, he said, Zammiluni, Zammiluni, and so the wrapping up of, much in the same way that people now wrap up infants, when they're crying or they're colicky or they are upset, has a way of soothing them. And so for even an adult, it's a similar manner of wrapping up. So we have two surahs that are similar, Zammiluni, and there's, so the person who is being wrapped up is called Al-Muzammil, or the one who wraps himself up. And then Muddathir also, Dathiruni, is a similar word, which is the Ism al-Fa'il of Dathara, or the Ism al-Fa'il of Zammala. So the Mudathir or Al-Muzammil. But for most of the narrations, Ya Ayyuhal Muddathir was revealed first before Ya Ayyuhal Muzammil. So then Ya Ayyuhal Muddathir, the one who was wrapped up, Qum fa'anzir, rise and forewarn. Wa'anzir comes from to warn, and we know that the Prophet ﷺ was sent Nadhiran wa Bashira. And Nadhir is the one who warns, and Bashir is the one who gives glad tidings. Here initially he only said Qum fa'anzir, and didn't say Qum fa'anzir wa Bashir wa Abshir, because no one yet was Muslim, so it was not the maqam, it was not the place for bishara at this point. And we see later on that it was, but initially it was a time of nidara, or to forewarn. وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, and your Lord, فَكَبِّرْ, aggrandize. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, and your clothes, maintain them pure. Some of them said that this is an example of an ayah that can be understood in both its zahir and its batin. In other words, in terms of its ostensible purport, which is the words themselves. Thiyab means clothes, tahir means to purify, and we know that before prayer there is a type of purification of the clothes, or the taharat al-khabath, which means that one should have their person and their clothing free from any najasat or impurities. But this does not preclude understanding a shari meaning or a batini meaning, one where, according to the rules of Arabic language, is valid as well, but it is more of a metaphorical meaning. And so the metaphorical meaning that they say is that thiyab here means the nafs. It's a kinaya, or it's a metaphor for the lower carnal soul, and the tathir here is to rid it of its impurities, the soul itself. And the idea of discerning batini meanings or metaphorical meanings in the Quran is one that is confirmed by all of the ulama, or virtually all of the ulama of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. There were very, very, very few of the ulama who refuted the idea of majaz in the Quran, or that there can be metaphorical meanings in the Quran, and most of them accepted that metaphorical meanings exist. This, though, should be differentiated from one of the firaq, one of the sects that came about, that was called Al-Batiniyya. And Al-Batiniyya negated the ostensible meaning of the ayahs and said that they're all metaphorical. And then there was the other group, Al-Zahiriyya, who said that only the ostensible meanings are valid and any metaphorical meaning is invalid, but the Hal al-Wasat, or the moderate opinion, the moderate view, and the balanced way, and the middle way, is to affirm both Zahiri and Batini meanings, both the ostensible purport and as well as the metaphorical meaning. And of course, to derive metaphorical meanings is not for anybody. There are certain qawa'id, or precepts and rules, to be followed in doing so. Chief amongst these rules is that it should not go outside of the known norms of Arabic language. There should not be sort of a takalluf in the way of the Arabic language to discern these meanings. وَالرُّجَزَ فَهْجُرْ. And here they said rujaz means something that is corrupt or filthy, and they see it to mean as al-awthan, or the asnam, the statues that the Quraysh used to worship. And so fahjur means to abandon them, to leave them. And then the end of the hadith, فَحَمِيَ الْوَحْيُ وَتَتَابَعَ. And so the wahi after this became more regular and followed therein. So with that we'll move on to the next hadith. عن أنس رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: ثلاث من كن فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما وأن يحب المرء لا يحبه إلا لله تعالى وأن يكره أن يعود في الكفر كما يكره أن يقذف في النار. So this hadith is narrated by Anas radiallahu anhu, and Anas ibn Malik was one of the companions who served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years in Al-Madinah. And in the hadith of Imam Nawawi narrates in his famous 40 hadith, narrated by Anas radiallahu anhu, he says that I served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years and never did he tell me for something that I have done, why did I do so, or something that I have not done, why I had not done so. So he was not reproached by the Prophet ﷺ. And we have to remember that Anas ibn Malik was even quite young when he was serving the Prophet ﷺ. So even for a young boy, Prophet ﷺ observed that type of rapport with him, to treat him like an adult, so to speak. So Anas here, he narrates that radiallahu anhu, three attributes, ثلاث من كن فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان. If one finds these three characteristics or three attributes, وجد, he will find حلاوة الإيمان, the sweetness, halawa, of Iman. Now interesting here that the Prophet ﷺ mentions the word halawa or sweetness with Iman. And he uses the word halawa or sweetness to indicate a high state of Iman, perhaps even the highest state of Iman. There are many other words he could have used to describe the best state of Iman, but he used the word halawa or sweetness. And this indicates, as we know, halawa is something, sweetness, that can be sensed by only one of the five senses, namely taste or dhawq. And the ulama, especially the ulama of tasawwuf and the spiritual sciences, dhawq plays a major role in the raising of one's iman. And Imam al-Ghazali, very famously, when he left Nizamiya, his teaching post in Baghdad, in Nizamiya, and then went on his sojourn, and he went to Damascus, and it was there that he wrote Ihya al-Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences. One of the things that he lamented, and he speaks about this at length in his autobiography Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, he says that he found in Baghdad that things were done in a very routine manner and only ostensibly, and that people didn't find the pure essence of faith. And he also mentioned that he studied all of the arguments of the falasifa, all of the arguments of the philosophers and of the scholastic theologians and so forth, but he found that the true way to Iman, he found it with the Sufis, or with Ahl Tasawwuf, those who reached a true sense of Iman with dhawq, with taste, with an experiential type of Iman more than a rational or intellectual one. Now, of course, that does not preclude the science of Ilm al-Kalam, scholastic theology, that deals with deriving rational arguments to argue or debate for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or His attributes, or some of the created beings like the angels and the prophets, and the nature of the world, and that it's hadith, or that it's created and not eternal, and so forth. And this is a subject that Ilm al-Kalam or scholastic theology deals with. But as Ghazali and others have mentioned, the way to actually raise the iman of an individual believer and sustain that iman, I think there's even a better word to sustain it, is via dhawq, is via a taste of experiencing it, experiencing the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, experiencing the love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to actually walk in the footsteps of that love. Then this is a way by which to really raise and even sustain one's iman. And I think this is actually what is plaguing much of the ummah today, that Islam has become reduced to a sort of a set of rules and regulations that one should follow, a sort of checklist of things that one should believe in, and then for many this is the extent of their Islam, and that's unfortunate, because there's so much more to it, especially in terms of the futuh, the openings and the spiritual blessings and insights one can be privy to if they follow in the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ and of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the great ulama that came after him, by following this method of suluk or tasleek, to follow that path and to raise oneself in degrees by following the sunnah as close as one can, and by attaching oneself with the pious ulama who have a certain requisite amount of experience and understanding in helping people reach higher levels of iman and to be the best believers and Muslims that they can actually be. So anyway, he says, ثلاث من كنا فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان, or the sweetness of iman. And this sweetness, as we said, goes back to dhawq, something that can be tasted. So using that term to indicate a higher or highest form of iman. On the same count, this sweetness, is it metaphorical or is it to be understood ostensibly? In other words, can you really taste something sweet? You know, is it really a feeling that's mahsus, that's something that's tangible within one? Or is it a metaphorical description that is talking about halawat al-iman, like to be raised in iman, or to have a higher form of iman or a better state of iman? Interestingly enough, we find that what we would call Ahl al-Zahir, or the people of fiqh and jurisprudence, or those who specialize in fiqh and jurisprudence, prefer the metaphorical meaning here. Namely that the sweetness is not a haqiqi type of sweetness, a tangible one, a literal one, but rather one that, as I mentioned, is descriptive in a sense of one's higher state of iman. Whereas Ahl al-Tasawwuf wa Ahl al-Turaq, they mention that no, it's actually a haqiqi meaning, it's a true meaning. And Shaykh Abdullah ibn Abi Jamrah mentions this in his commentary. And he said that this sweetness should be understood literally, because the general principle in making exegesis or commentary of either hadith or Quran or the nusus in general is that when you can understand it in a literal manner, then that takes precedence over understanding it in a metaphorical manner. And he said he offered some evidence of this literal understanding from the Sahaba. For example, Bilal ibn Rabah radiallahu anhu, when he was in Mecca and he was being tortured with heavy rock that was put on his chest, and he was forced to recant his Islam, and he refused to do so, and he kept saying Ahad, Ahad, Allah is one. Then there was actually a sweetness therein that he felt, that was in his chest, that was even on his lips, that helped him get through that event without even recanting, even in speech, about his Islam, even though it would have been permissible for him to do so in such a severe situation. And he also brings up the time when Bilal, years later, when he was on his deathbed, and his wife and family came to him and they said, "Waqarabah, yani what type of calamity you are in as you are dying here on the bed?" And he said, "La wa tarabah غدا ألقى الأحبة محمدا وحزبه." He said, no, this is tarab, this is actually sweet and nice. Tomorrow I meet Muhammad ﷺ and his party. In other words, in the afterlife. So he offers this, the Shaykh, as an example of the sweetness that can be understood in a literal sense. And there are other examples that amount, such as Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, after the Khandaq, he was standing on the other side and he was hit by an arrow that pierced his leg. And he told the Sahaba to remove it while he was in prayer, because he would not feel it. And when he's in prayer, there was a certain sweetness he would feel that would overcome the pain that he would feel of the arrow being taken out of his leg. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Both interpretations obviously can be understood, but depending upon one's perspective, then there can be a variety of routes by which to understand the meaning in this particular wording of the hadith. So وَجَدَ حَلَاوَةَ الْإِيمَانِ, the sweetness of Iman. And then he mentions the three attributes, or the three characteristics. The first, أَنْ يَكُونَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَحَبَّ إِلَيْهِ مِمَّا سِوَاهُمَا. And the first is that Allah and His Messenger are more beloved to him than anyone besides them. And this is significant. This particular part of the hadith gives us a sense, some sense of the high status and maqam of the Prophet ﷺ, when we have the dhamir, or the pronoun, at the end of this part of the hadith go back to both Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ. So أَحَبَّ إِلَيْهِ مِمَّا سِوَاهُمَا, and huma here means it's the dual tense, or the dual pronoun that goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Additionally, the word habba or hub means love, and so that Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam are more beloved to him than anyone else. And we'll see that the second characteristic or attribute, أن يحب المرء لا يحبه إلا لله, to love one's friend or brother and not to love him for any sake except for Allah's sake. So the first two actually use the word hub, or love. And so in the beginning we had halawa, which is a sweetness, which is dhawq, which is a taste, and then hub. So we see that the indication of a higher form of iman are not a'mal badaniya, walakin a'mal qalbiyya. They are not actions and movements of the body. It doesn't say that who will find halawat al-iman is the one who prays the most, or fasts the most, or pays the most zakah, or makes hajj and umrah the most times, but rather the one who has this particular maqam, degree, that is only measured in the heart. And so the amount of love one might have for Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is something that cannot be seen except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even here we see that the hadith is addressed to the Sahaba and the ones after, namely us, other Muslims, by which we can judge ourselves, or which we can have a criteria for ourselves, not so that we can use this as a criteria or as a standard by which to judge others. In other words, it's only looking at how one could gauge themselves and see where they're at. You know, as some of the Sufiyya say, or Ibn Ata al-Sakandari in particular, he says, if you want to know your maqam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then look at Allah's maqam with you. So it's a method of self awareness, and to sort of gauge one's degree of love by looking at themselves. So our deen is a deen of introspection, of reflection, introspection, of reviewing oneself. The saying of Umar, حاسبوا أنفسكم قبل أن تحاسبوا أو موتوا قبل أن تموتوا. You know, take yourself into account before you are taken into account. Die before you die. موتوا قبل أن يموتوا, meaning, in other words, to be prepared for death before you actually die. So all of these go back to a meaning of this type of reflection, self-reflection and introspection. And I think many mistakes are being made by some of the ummah today when they read hadith like this, or they read some of the ayahs and so forth, and they try to use them as I mentioned, a hammer by which to knock on other Muslims' heads and try to judge them, or to gauge their level of iman and so forth, as if iman could be measured by one's outward actions. It cannot be. The Prophet ﷺ, he said about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he said, ما فضل أبو بكر عليكم بكثير صلاة وصيام ولكن بشيء وقر في صدره. He said Abu Bakr has not have been preferred to you, the rest of the Sahaba, because of how many extra prayers he has done or how much fasting he has done, but rather something that stirred in his heart. And even the name, the epithet Siddiq, was something that was given to a Siddiq because of something, a matter of the heart. When the Prophet ﷺ went on Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, or the ascension to Jerusalem and heaven, and he told some of the Quraysh afterwards, and he had not spoken to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq about it yet, and they tried to go to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and they told him, your friend Muhammad ﷺ, he has claimed that he has gone to Jerusalem back in one night and also to heaven. What do you think of this? And so the response of as-Siddiq was, if he said it, then it's true. فَهُوَ الَّذِي صَدَّقَ. He is the one that he is found Muhammad ﷺ to be trustworthy and honest. And that's how he got his name, as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. So these things mentioned in the Hadith are matters of the heart, especially the first two, that Allah and His Messenger are more beloved to me or to the person than anyone else. And love can be measured in a variety of ways. There are ways to engender love. There are indications of why one loves or that they are a true lover. Qadi Iyad in Al-Shifa, he speaks of some of these when he speaks about love of the Prophet ﷺ and love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he mentions the ayah in particular in Ali Imran, قُلْ إِن كُنتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Say that if you truly love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاتَّبِعُونِي, then follow His Messenger and follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then you will find Allah's love reflected back to you. So hub can be manifested, or love can be manifested in ittiba', in following that. And so there can be really no one can claim to be a lover of the deen, lover of the Prophet ﷺ, lover of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are clearly transgressing. As the poet says, تعصي الإله وتظهر حبه هذا غريب في القياس بديع لو كنت محبا لأطعت إن المحب لمن يحب مطيع. He said that you transgress and you claim love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he said this is a strange matter that no one has known. If you truly loved him, then you would have followed him, because the one who is a true lover follows the one that they love. So it has to be maqroon, or has to be tied with ittiba' sunnah, following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Sahaba, radwanullah alayhim, they were renowned for their love of the Prophet ﷺ, and following every minute detail as much as they could, even though they understood that it was not for them to actually pressure others to follow in the same manner, that even in his what's called the a'mal al-jibilliya, yani the acts or the natural characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ, like what he liked to eat, what he avoided eating just out of personal taste, they even tried to emulate him in these things as well. So that first part of the hadith, that love, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ are more beloved than anything else. Second part also mentions love, أن يحب المرأة لا يحبه إلا لله تعالى. And that here we see that the first part of the hadith is dealing with the relationship between one and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by virtue of the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we know that the door to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Prophet ﷺ. There's no other doors available to us, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except via the Prophet ﷺ. He is the one who taught us this deen. He is the one who the Quran was revealed to him, and then he taught it to us. So there's no other doorway except that. So following the Prophet ﷺ is also following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Loving the Prophet ﷺ is also loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's more of the divine relationship. The second part of the hadith is dealing about our relationship with everyone else, al-khalq. And if we look to all of the acts that are governed by the Sharia, namely ibadat and muamalat or adat. So ibadat means acts of devotion, acts of worship. They are governed by the Sharia. And here in the first part we're dealing with al-ibadat, the devotional acts. Second part of the hadith we're dealing with al-muamalat, or dealing with people, which are also under the rubric of the Sharia. So here too, in our relationship, in our fellow dealings with man, they should be based upon a love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, not for maslaha, not for any worldly gain that one might be able to derive by having a relationship with said person. And so here al-mar means just person or man, so it includes all of our relationships, whether that be familial, such as being a son or daughter, being a brother or sister, being a father or mother, being an uncle or an aunt, being a cousin, being a friend, being a neighbor, being a co-worker. These are all different relationships that we in our everyday lives have to deal with in one way or the other. And so all of those should be based upon hub, or love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even for Muslim and non-Muslim. For the Muslim, obviously, they have the extra right of being Muslim. For the non-Muslim, they are a member of humanity. They are a human being, and they are also potential Muslims. And not only that, they're potentially going to be in a better place than you're going to be in the next life. So it's not for us to judge anyone. It's for us to convey, for us to invite, for us to treat equitably. And that was the manner of the Prophet ﷺ. And then the last part of the hadith, وَأَنْ يَكْرَهَ أَنْ يَعُودَ فِي الْكُفْرِ كَمَا يَكْرَهُ أَنْ يُقْذَفَ فِي النَّارِ. And then to despise or detest, to return to kufr, such as much as one would despise and detest to be thrown into the hellfire. So here we see the opposite of hub, which is kurh and yakraha. And so it's interesting that kurhi or karahiyya, or hatred of something, is not tied to a particular person or a particular thing. In fact, there's not even a verse in the Quran that talks about karahiyya, or hatred even of Iblis, la'natullahi alayhi. We curse him, but even that type of naked type of hatred is not even intrinsic in the meanings of the Quran. Here, hatred is returning to a particular state, returning to a state of kufr, which in other words, a state of denial of reality. And so denial of reality is a detestable state, and it should be detestable to everyone. And so to return to such a state after having been in it and then founding the light of Islam, the light of the deen, this should be as detestable to one as being thrown into the hellfire. So we take the three aspects of the hadith. The first two deal with love. First one, a divine and prophetic love, love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The second, love of our fellow man, of all of those who are members of humanity, is a type of love. And then the last one is a type of hatred, so to speak, or to detest something, but it's not directed toward an individual or directed towards a particular thing, but rather it's directed toward a return to a particular state. And then even in that, it's talking about the state of an individual. So again, these are things that couldn't be measured ostensibly by anyone. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would know the true nature of them in any believer. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. We will, I think, read also the next hadith, inshallah, the third hadith. عن عبادة ابن الصامت أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: بايعوني على ألا تشركوا بالله شيئا ولا تسرقوا ولا تزنوا ولا تقتلوا أولادكم ولا تأتوا ببهتان تفترونه بين أيديكم وأرجلكم ولا تعصوا في معروف فمن وفى منكم فأجره على الله ومن أصاب من ذلك شيئا فعوقب في الدنيا فهو كفارة له ومن أصاب من ذلك شيئا ثم ستره الله عز وجل فهو إلى الله إن شاء عفى عنه وإن شاء عاقبه فبايعناه على ذلك. So this hadith was narrated by Ubadah ibn Samit, and he was from Ahl al-Medina, and he was Ansari, and he was Khazraji, and he was actually the Ra'is al-Khazraj, or the chief of the tribe of the Khazraj. And so he mentions that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, Bayi'uni, and here the word al-mubaya'a, or bay'a, means to take an oath or to take a vow. Or bay'a. So mubaya'a, bay'a are similar. And it's interesting, the verb form here, baya'a, is very close to ba'a. Ba'a yabi'u means to sell. Baya'a, yubayi'u, means to take an oath. And this extra alif after the ba is mazid. In other words, it's not intrinsic to the three-letter root of the word. The three-letter root of the word is the ba and the ya and the ayn. So the alif being extra and not intrinsic, this is called by the grammarians alif al-musharaka. In other words, an alif of participation. So even though the verb takes on a subject and a direct object, bayi'uni, so one is taking an oath or vow to someone else, there is a sort of musharaka or participation duality between the two. So it's a oath and vow, but it's predicated and understood on certain conditions that apply to both al-mubaya' wal-mubaya'. Al-mubaya' is the one giving the bay'ah, and the mubaya' is the one receiving the bay'ah. So it's predicated on both following certain conditions, and in this case, obviously, it would be following Allah's commands and the Prophet's commands, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he asked them, the Prophet ﷺ said, Bayi'uni, take an oath, and then he mentioned particular things. The first, أَلَّا تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ شَيْئًا, to not associate any partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know that al-kufr or al-kufran is of two types. The first type, obviously, is al-kufr al-jali, which is to actually associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the word kufr linguistically means to cover something up. In the Quran and some of the verses, the kuffar or the kafir is actually the farmer, the one who covers up the seeds that is being covered and then will sprout forth later on. So the kafir is the one who covers up the truth or rejects the truth. Another type of kufran is kufran in-ni'mah, which is to reject a blessing or failure to recognize the blessings that one have been bestowed upon one. If we look to the sin of Iblis, la'anahullah, yes, he was arrogant, yes, he refused to follow Allah's command when he asked him to prostrate before Adam alayhi salam, and it was a prostration of ta'zeem, not a prostration of ibadah, prostration to show following the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was certainly not a prostration that he was in any way worshipping Adam alayhi salam, but nevertheless he refused, and part of that refusal was based upon his rejection or his inability to recognize the blessings, the ni'am that have been placed upon him. We know that Iblis, he is from the jinn, he is from those beings that are created from fire, and he is not from the angels, but he was within the accompaniment of the angels. When the ayah says فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ, here sajadu, the waw or the jama' goes back to the angels. So even though he was not from the angels in form, he was from them in works. So he had reached or was reaching a maqam similar to that of the angels, and that is a tremendous blessing and bounty. And in fact, that is even a blessing and bounty human beings aspire to be somewhat like the angels in their ability to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their inability to disobey Him. But we find he didn't recognize and didn't acknowledge these blessings, but rather he rejected it, and rejected even in doing so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outright. So sometimes kufran in ni'mah, that the rejection of blessings and ni'am, can lead to al-kufr al-akbar or kufr al-jali, or real kufr, which is to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even to deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we know that blessings come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you deny the blessings, then in essence, in some form, you are denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the second part, وَلَا تَسْرِقُوا وَلَا تَزِنُوا. So not to steal, وَلَا تَزِنُوا, not to commit fornication, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ, and not to kill or murder one's children. So السرقة is has a particular connotation in actually the Sharia, which is somewhat different than what we call ghasb, or to usurp. So sariqa is defined by taking that which does not belong to one, that belongs to another, and actually taking in a manner that you have to sort of break into something and take it. So sariqa also implies sort of a breaking and entering. So entering into an area that's not yours to enter to, and then you take that thing. Versus ghasb, which is to sort of usurp something, like ghasb al-ard, taking someone's land. If the land is, not secured and it's just there, and by occupying it, or occupation of something illegally has a different ruling than the sariqa, or the stealing by entering into and breaking and entering and taking something that's not yours. So in other words, the crimes of opportunity are distinguished from crimes that are premeditated in terms of stealing, because the sariqa is very clearly referring to crimes that are premeditated versus crimes of opportunity. So for example, if you let someone into your house voluntarily, and then they took something out of your house and left, the Sharia would not consider that to be sariqa. That is something else. So the had punishment wouldn't be particularly prescribed in that case, which was the cutting of the hand. Rather, it would be something the judge would decide. Versus someone who actually broke into your house, broke into the safe, and took something out and left, then that would be considered to be sariqa. So we see the manifestation of the rahmah in the Sharia, in that crimes of opportunity are treated differently than crimes that are premeditated, much as we see as a common theme even in man-made law in many of the countries around the world. وَلَا تَزِنُوا وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا. And zina is to commit fornication, or to have sexual relations outside of marriage. And even as zina is very specific, it specifically refers to intercourse and not anything else. And so the had punishment would apply only in that case, and then with the particular conditions for it to be applied. And even the zina during the Jahili times was not something that was overly prevalent, especially amongst the higher classes. It was something that happened, but even the people of the Jahiliyyah recognized zina not to be a noble thing to engage in, but even though some of them did engage in it. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ, and not to kill one's children. And this is also referring to the Jahili practice that many of them participated in, which was al-Walead al-Banat, which would be to bury their daughters alive, which was somewhat common in the Jahili practice, as sons were more valued, and then it was seen as sort of a shame to have a daughter, and some of them would bury them alive. And so this was something that was contrived in their own contrived manner to be a noble thing, because they were trying to be noble and trying to rid themselves of shame. But without the Sharia, without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us what is good and what is bad, then one cannot determine this on their own, and so they made a mistake in that. وَلَا تَأْتُوا بِبُهْتَانٍ تَفْتَرُونَهُ بَيْنَ أَيْدِيكُمْ وَأَرْجُلِكُمْ. And not to come with buhtan. Now buhtan is an interesting word. It's a type of prevarication or lying, but it's not any type of lying. Lying in Arabic would just be kadhib, to lie. But buhtan comes min al-buhat, which is to sort of lying. In addition to lying, there would be humiliation. So it's sort of like slandering someone, or libel, or something of that sort. So you're not just lying, but you make this type of false claim, and in doing so you humiliate the person. And this is usually associated with accusing someone of something they haven't done, or accusing them of zina, accusing them of being the son or daughter of zina. These type of things are very grave accusations, and they are that much more severe because they can wind up ruining one's reputation, and it could be done in an undeserved manner. And the thing about reputations is that once it becomes ruined, it's very difficult to actually fix it after that. And so that's why the Prophet ﷺ made specific mention of it in the Hadith. And it's interesting because we're living in a time now where there's a digital electronic record of almost everything that we do, and so something that you might have said or done 20 years ago will always be there in the record, and for people just a Google search away from finding it. So we should be very, very careful with how we speak of others and how we throw around accusations and of the sort, because it's even I think more pertinent in our times, because it's very difficult to forget things that have happened now because of this grandiose digital internet that we're all involved in. وَلَا تَعْصُوا فِي مَعْرُوفٍ. Here, وَلَا تَعْصُوا فِي مَعْرُوفٍ, it means that not to disobey in the manner of ma'ruf. And ma'ruf just means anything that is good. It actually comes from the word arafa, to know. So in other words, it sort of means like the common good. The good that is well known by everyone, that everyone affirms as being good. So it means things as helping others out. If they ask you for a favor, not to deny them that favor. Surah Al-Ma'un in the Quran makes a clear connection between those who are remiss in their prayers and those who deny favors to others. الذين هم يراؤون ويمنعون فويل للمصلين الذين هم يراؤون ويمنعون الماعون. So woe to those who are musallun, yani they're actually doing physically, they're praying, but yura'un, they're only doing it to be seen. And then the last verse, الذين هم يراؤون ويمنعون الماعون, and those who deny or do not permit the ma'un, which is similar to ma'ruf. In other words, those things that people ask for a favor, ask for something to borrow. So by denying this, it's an indication of someone's character that they're also a person who is not hafid or preserving their prayer, and at the same time they're remiss in their prayer. And so this also lends to their mu'amala that is difficult or not worthy of others. When the Prophet ﷺ said, من لم تنهاه صلاته عن الفحشاء والمنكر فما ازداد إلا بعدا. Whoever's prayer does not stop them from doing fahsha and munkar, from saying things that are despicable and doing things that are despicable, then they have not come closer, they have just moved further away. So this idea of ta'asu wala ta'asu fi ma'ruf, that when someone is asked of something that by a fellow Muslim, they should in their best of their ability try to serve that need. And we know from the Shama'il of the Prophet ﷺ that كَانَ لَا يَرُدُّ سَائِلًا. Prophet ﷺ would never turn away someone who was asking something. So even if it's something that's symbolic, but at the same time there's not a rejection or a refusal. Then he says, فَمَنْ وَفَى مِنْكُمْ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. So whoever fulfills this, the things that I've mentioned, and I've stayed away from things that I've mentioned, then his ajr with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his reward will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, taking it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for any worldly gain, but for a gain in the realm of the divine. وَمَنْ أَصَابَ مِنْ ذَلِكَ شَيْئًا فَعُوقِبَ فِي الدُّنْيَا فَهُوَ كَفَّارَةٌ لَهُ. But وَمَنْ أَصَابَ, so whoever makes a mistake and falls into one of these things that have been previously mentioned, فَعُوقِبَ فِي الدُّنْيَا, right, but has been punished in the dunya in terms of the had punishment, فَهُوَ كَفَّارَةٌ لَهُ, then it's an expiation for him. And this is somewhat of a debate between the ulama of jurisprudence. If someone has the had, the criminal punishment applied to them in this life, is that serve as an expiation, and then they are considered to be free from that sin in the next life. And the majority of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah agreed with that as being the dominant position. Some of them, though, added that they also need to have tawbah in addition to the kafara being applied. But generally speaking, when you see the word kafara or expiation, it means a way for making up for a transgression. Just like when we say the kafarat al-siyam, someone who purposefully breaks their fast during Ramadan, during the day, then there's a kafara, which is to fast 60 consecutive days, or to feed 16 miskin, or to feed 60 uh, needy people. And depending upon the madhab, the Shafi'is say that it should be in the order, so someone, if they have the ability to fast 2 months, and they have to fast 2 months, while the Maliki madhab says that one can choose between the two. Whatever the case may be, the kafara acts as an expiation for the sin that was committed. Same thing for an expiation for an oath that was broken, to fast 3 days, similar. ومن أصاب من ذلك شيء ثم ستره الله عز وجل فهو إلى الله إن شاء عفى عنه وإن شاء عاقبه. Then he mentions the same thing. ومن أصاب من ذلك شيء, and someone who has, so there's two scenarios here. Either you committed the sin and then you were punished for it in a judicial manner, or ومن أصاب من ذلك شيء ثم ستره الله, then Allah covered him, in other words, kept it secret, no one found out about it. فهو إلى الله, then his matter is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إن شاء عفى عنه وإن شاء عاقبه. In other words, إن شاء عفى عنه, if he so desires, he will pardon him, and if he so desires, he will take him into account. So here we see that a satar, or the covering of the sin, is a possible scenario. And also this leads to a debate amongst the scholars of fiqh. If one does commit a sin that requires a had punishment, should they confess and receive that punishment, or should they refrain from doing so? Again, difference of opinion. Many of the ulama, though, said that they are under no compunction to go forth and to admit to it, to confess to it, necessarily so, and that they should make tawbah, that they should seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While others have said, as some of us was the practice of the Sahaba, who actually went to the Prophet ﷺ and admitted that they had committed zina, and the Prophet ﷺ avoided applying the had punishment, as happened with two of the Sahaba, one a woman, the other a man, but nonetheless they insisted. And this was in their belief that their sin would be expiated by this punishment in this life, so that they would not have to suffer the punishment for it in the next life. But nonetheless, the deen it's wasa', there is rahmah, there is mercy, and so if one decides to keep it covered, then one should keep it covered, for sure. And it should not be the matter of the Muslim, the dignified Muslim, to go around talking about their past, especially if it was sinful, and say that one did this, one did that. If Allah has covered it for you, and His satar is a type of ni'mah, keeping this away from prying ears is a type of blessing that you should be thankful for, and you should make tawbah, make istighfar, seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have resolved not to commit it again, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah will forgive you for it. So I think we will stop here for now, inshallah. Inshallah, I thank all those for listening, and I hope that we continue next week, inshallah. We can now take questions via the chat window if people have any. The question in the Hadith, die so you may die. موتوا قبل أن تموتوا, is it authentic? I don't have the takhrij with me right now. I'm not sure if it's merely a khabar that goes back to Umar or goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. But as I mentioned, the ma'na, the meaning is true, is sahih. And this actually, I'd want to elaborate a little bit more. The idea of making sure of the veracity and authenticity of a hadith is something obviously that is prescribed, and it's something that is commendable. It's not and praiseworthy. But at the same time, we should be aware of the manhaj, of the methodology of the ulama, and how they use the hadith, especially when they were backing up things that they were saying or referring to certain things. And so to speak of, to look for very rigorously authenticated hadith, for example, would be quite important in matters of iman or aqidah or creed. And the ulama said that we should not base creed or aqidah on anything except from the Quran and the rigorously authenticated hadith or the sahih hadith in most matters, most of the issues of creed. In fiqh, for example, obviously the preference is for sahih hadith, but you will find that in fiqh many of the mujtahid ulama, including the four imams, used hasan hadith, or hadith that have a good chain of transmission, and even in some cases other hadith that were da'if or had a weaker chain of transmission, with the condition that it was not too weak, and obviously that it's not something that's fabricated, and also depend upon the particular mas'ala. For example, they say that if there's a plethora of even weak hadith on a particular issue, or prescribing or recommending a particular day to fast or to observe in a particular devotion, then this is a sort of a strong indication that there is an asl, there is a foundation for that. For example, the 15th of Sha'ban, fasting the 15th day of Sha'ban and praying during the night. To my knowledge, there are no rigorously authenticated hadith or sahih hadith dealing with that particular night, but there are many hadith of lesser categories. So they said that because of the amount of hadith that have been narrated in this particular instance, then fasting the 15th of Sha'ban is something that's prescribed and is recommended. And obviously it does not contradict any of the Sharia precepts. Fasting is always commendable, and it's particularly commendable in Sha'ban. And so singling out the 15th of Sha'ban is something that does not go against the concepts or the precepts of the Sharia. So I commend your question. Is the hadith authentic or not? But keep in mind, when I say al-ma'na sahih, when I say the meaning is true, it means that there's an overwhelming preponderance of evidence from the Sharia, from both the Quran and from the hadith in general, saying that the idea, for example, of taking oneself into account, or having muraqabah, or watching one's actions and deeds, is so well known from the deen, you can almost say that it's min mu'allim min ad-din bid-darura. It's necessarily known from the deen, that to cite some akhbar or hadith here and there that we may or may not be sure of their particular authenticity doesn't go against the general vein of following that particular aspect of the deen, as I was mentioning. Speaking of Abu Bakr, when did the Prophet ﷺ meet him, become his close friend? Was it before Islam sometime, or did they only become close after? I believe it was even before that they had knew each other well and they were close. Is it possible to get a brief bio about Shaykh al-Shinnawi, whom you mentioned last time? I read that he was Shaykh al-Azhar in the 1800s. Yeah, indeed he was Shaykh al-Azhar in the 1800s. Maybe next week I'll just mention briefly some of the points of his bio, inshallah. Okay, so it wasn't a kind of fada'il like some of the hadith in the Ahya Ulumuddin. Yeah, I mean, more or less. We're talking about fada'il, but even in this case, I'm not just talking about fada'il. I'm talking about the if we have a well-prescribed, well-understood concept in the deen, that is supported in general terms by Quran and Hadith, and then I mention a particular instance of one Hadith somewhere that supports it, then uh, it it's not as important as the authenticity of that Hadith, especially considering that we have a preponderance of the Sharia already telling us that the concept is valid. So that was the point I was trying to make. So I think there are no more questions from what I can see here. So أسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يوفقنا جميعا لما يحبه من طاعته وطاعة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وأن يلهمنا الصواب ويلهمنا الرشد، وأن يعطي كل شيء سؤله، وإلى حضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الفاتحة. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.